Hello, Star Wars fans! I'm trying something a little bit different with this review, and that different thing is I will be reviewing two completely different novels and comparing them to each other. Now, it's not uncommon for me to review more than one book. I've done the Dark Lord trilogy. I've done the movie novelizations all under one review, but typically when I do that, the books are connected in some way, whether it be linked to a character like the Thrawn books or, like I said, the movie novelizations are all kind of under the same umbrella, so I figured I'd tackle all the ones I could. Or like the Dark Lord trilogy, it's all a trilogy, so review it. And here it's going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be reviewing one book from the Expanded Universe Legends canon, and one book from the new Disney canon, and comparing them to each other and talking about the merits and demerits of both stories. And I thought it'd be interesting to see, it's like, because the two books I'm reviewing are somewhat similar in terms of their plot and their story, and try to accomplish kind of the same things. So I thought maybe it'd be interesting to compare the two books and see which one was better. So, I might do more reviews like this in the future if the situation presents itself. But without further ado, let's get started. The Legends Expanded Universe book I will be reviewing is Kenobi by John Jackson Miller. I do not own a physical copy of that book because I listened to it on Audible.com. Used one of my free downloads to listen to it that way. And again, if I haven't said it before, and I know I have said it before, Audible, it's a great app. And if you're an Amazon shopper like I am, it's a godsend. I just love it. But yeah, that book details basically how Obi-Wan Kenobi adjusted to life on Tatooine following the events of Revenge of the Sith. So there's a lot of ground to cover there and a lot of good material for story, because it's like, what the hell was he doing for 20 years? So it's a very rich idea. There's a lot of material to be had with that type of story. So I thought a novel about that specific point in time was very interesting and worthy of a novel, and I was really excited to check it out. And the second book I'll be reviewing is from the new Disney canon. Also centers around a heroic character that is familiar with many fans. Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston. This book is meant to detail, again, fill in the blanks between what happened to Ahsoka between the two animated shows, between Clone Wars and then her return in Star Wars Rebels. What happened in between that time, and this book tries to cover that. So it's really, you've got two Jedi characters. Both of them are experiencing somewhat self-inflicted exiles. Both of them are trying to adjust to life in the new Empire and trying to hide from the Empire, while also trying to, accomplish goals throughout the galaxy, whether it be establishing, trying to seek justice, or in Obi-Wan's case, protecting young Luke Skywalker and using him as the new Chosen One to ultimately fight the Empire and take him down and keep the Jedi alive. So both stories are very similar, but again, they come from separate canons, so kind of a different style and different continuities at play here. So let's start with Kenobi, because that was the one I read first. Kenobi, like I said, was written by Mr. Miller, who is no stranger to Star Wars. He had written several comics for the Knights of the Old Republic. He also, strangely enough, he wrote Star Wars A New Dawn, which was sort of a prequel to Rebels. I haven't read it, so I don't know all the details about it, but I do know it was one of the first pieces of material released under the new canon. So he wrote one of the first pieces of the new canon, and he wrote this book, which was one of the last EU books published. I don't think it was the very, very last one, but it was close to it. And it came right at the tail end before Disney, rendered the Expanded Universe non-canon and just moved in their own direction. So, like I said, this book is about Obi-Wan Kenobi and his life on Tatooine and adjusting to that life. And it's a very interesting read and mixes in a lot of different things, namely, some people would definitely get a Western vibe while reading this. It's got all the earmarks of an old school Western with the lone kind of a lone gunman hero, even though Obi-Wan's not really a gunman. He's not quick to action like, say, an Anakin or a Luke would be, but he is kind of the guy, the lone hero having to protect a certain group of people from being hurt. And the way it's set up, like, the Tusken Raiders kind of play the role of, like, Native Americans to the moisture farmers, kind of cowboys. So the setting and everything and all of that really gives this kind of a grounded Western feel to it. And I can almost picture the events of the book playing out in my head. And the look I envision in my mind is like an old Western with like a John Wayne or a Clint Eastwood or something like that. And I thought it was written very well in that style. And I guess you could say that it makes this story seem kind of small. It doesn't have the big galactic scale. There are no big spaceship battles or anything like that going on. But it is a very, smaller, grounded, more intimate, character-driven story. And as I've gotten older, I've found that, quite honestly, I prefer more character-driven stories over grand, big, blockbustery epics. And Star Wars does have great characters. I've said that before. So that's why those movies definitely have a life outside of my childhood, and why I keep revisiting those movies, because they do have substance to them. But, you look at some of the blockbusters I watched as a kid that tried to be, like Deep Impact, just as an example, or Armageddon, like movies like that tried to be big and huge scale and, explosions and all this other stuff going on. But when you rewatch it as an adult, there's not really a whole lot of substance there. So I kind of like, smaller, more down-to-earth, grounded, character-driven stories like this year's Logan, for example. A great movie. And I like this book. I liked that it didn't try to be overly complicated, overly big, didn't have any major space battles or anything like it. It wouldn't have made sense to have those things because Obi-Wan's supposed to be hiding. So yeah, I really like that kind of smaller, down to earth on Tatooine. Down to Tatooine, I should say. I like that smaller approach, and I felt like it gave the book more of a heart, I think. And really, the true heart of the book for me was not so much Obi-Wan Kenobi himself, even though he is very interesting. We all love Obi-Wan. He's one of the most classic characters in all of Star Wars, but really the family that he ultimately tries to protect from the Tusken Raiders and, the kind of, shadier individuals on Tatooine, shall I say. And that's Annaline's family and her children. She's a single mom raising 2 kids, trying to run a bar and a store and all this other stuff. And I really liked Annaline. I thought she was a really fun character. The frustrated mother, the kind of this snippy, fire in her belly personality. I thought she was really great and really funny and really just a charming character. And I could, her chemistry with Obi-Wan, it just kind of leapt off the page to me, because she was kind of like, Obi-Wan's the stoic, simple-minded Jedi that's just trying to not, bring attention to himself, which ultimately he does, of course. But, he's a very good-natured guy, but he's also kind of, he wants to do the right thing. He wants to help everybody, but he also has a sense of duty in that he has to protect Luke, and he has to take steps to do that as well. So he's more like, he's still, even though the Jedi Order has fallen, he's still very much in that Jedi Order mindset of, I have to fulfill my duty, and I can't get some ladies on the side. And that's the other aspect of this book. It does feel like a romance novel at times, where Annaline is clearly interested in Ben Kenobi, and that's another little detail in this book that I really like. We find out how he got the name Ben Kenobi, and because I always felt like in the original movie that it's like, wait a minute, he changed his name from Obi-Wan to Ben and just assumed that nobody would figure that out. And it's like, come on, the name Kenobi is pretty distinct. I think if Darth Vader heard that there was a Ben Kenobi on Tatooine, he'd be a little suspicious of it. But I initially kind of reasoned it in my mind that, Oh, Obi-Wan was his Jedi name, and Ben is his real name. And, when I watched A New Hope as a kid, that was how I reasoned it. And then, of course, the prequels came out. I was like, no, there's no such thing as Jedi names. Never mind. But anyway, yeah, so there's that little, like, I don't want to call it a romance because Obi-Wan never, spoiler alert, he never really gives in and never succumbs to Annaline's advances, but even though he doesn't, I feel like their interactions with each other are great throughout the book, and there is that, it does kind of point that direction. It's like, come on, Obi-Wan, you're stuck on a desert planet for God knows how long watching over a kid. It's like, come on, you can find some love, It's like, come on, man. Don't be so dogmatic. Don't be so strict on, But I also like that through these conversations that he has with Annaline, you get a sense of how he really feels following the events of Revenge of the Sith and how much he blames himself for what happened. And they do that in a great way where he can't really tell anybody who he is or what happened, but when he's talking to Annaline and he cracks a little bit where he starts saying things like, this horrible thing happened and it's my fault. And that was a good way to kind of utilize the existing canon, the events of the prequels. Say what you will about them, they do exist as canon, so you gotta work within that framework. And taking those events and then using it to work in shaping Obi-Wan's character throughout this story. And I thought it worked very, very well, and it was an enjoyable, I don't want to call it a read because I listened to the audiobook, but it was definitely an enjoyable story and an enjoyable novel, and one that I got a lot of enjoyment out of. And again, it's one that kind of kept it simple and really just kept it focused solely on the characters, and because of that, it worked out very well. Other characters in the book, there's the shady moisture farmer. I forget his name off the top of my head, but he makes for a nice antagonist throughout the story as he succumbs more and more to his own greed and his own selfish desires. And I really like the way they handled the Tusken Raiders in this. Again, I kind of compared them to the Native Americans in like an old Western, but they wind up being a little bit more sympathetic than one might expect. I think watching the original movies, you just kind of think of them as these savage, violent desert travelers, but here they give them a little bit more material where you get a sense of what they are, why they are the way they are, and the chief of this particular group of them, Plug Eye, what that character's all about. Also very interesting and very well written and fun characters. So yeah, I really enjoyed Kenobi. I'll say this, it might be one of my favorite Star Wars books ever written. It was one of those like really surprising ones, and not that I went into it expecting, it's a story about Kenobi's life on Tatooine, so it's a lot of potential for material there, but I didn't quite expect it to. Let me put it this way: I didn't expect to care about the side characters as much as I did, and I think that helped me enjoy the book a lot. I think especially Annaline and her family, her two kids, and everything, and all the little mishaps that they get into. I felt like they were fun characters to focus on and follow. And when Obi-Wan wasn't around, they were kind of the focus of the story, and they were great. So I was never missing Obi-Wan, and I think that's a good thing. If you establish good characters, good side characters, you don't get upset when the main character isn't around. And yeah, I just thought it was very, very good. And another little thing that the book did that I really enjoyed, there are these little, I guess based off Aftermath, we'll call them interludes, where they detail Obi-Wan Kenobi trying to communicate with Qui-Gon and having like his own little meditation period, basically talking out loud and meditating, trying to communicate with Qui-Gon. These make for nice little moments where we know exactly what Obi-Wan is thinking and how he's feeling at any particular time, and how tired and frustrated he might be, or how hopeful he is, or how much despair he's feeling at that moment, or whatever. And those make for nice character moments sprinkled throughout the book, and very well handled and very good overall. And I think that was very interesting to include those. You could take those out and you probably wouldn't I don't think the story would suffer, but they do so much for Obi-Wan's character and do detail that, yeah, he did have to go through a lot of training to understand how to communicate with a being that is one with the Force and all of that. So for that, that was a nice little interesting creative decision to make the book work and make it stand out a little bit more as well. So yeah, Kenobi, that gets an A+ for me. I really enjoyed that book. I think it, you look at all the standalone, like, character spotlight books that are sprinkled throughout both the EU and the new Disney canon. This one might be one of the better ones, maybe the best one. I really liked it. I highly recommend that book. I thought it was very enjoyable. Very enjoyable. I'm stuttering. But anyway, yeah, so that's Kenobi. Let's get into Ahsoka, the book about the new Disney, or the book from the new Disney canon about an established character, Ahsoka Tano, who originally started as one of the central characters in the Clone Wars TV series, and has gone on to become a very popular character ever since the start of that show. And I guess I'll start off with my review of the book by talking about how I personally feel about the character of Ahsoka, because when she initially was conceived, there was a lot of negativity and there was a lot of backlash. That's like, oh my god, Anakin Skywalker's getting a Padawan that we never heard of, was never mentioned in episode 3, and in this TV show that takes place between 2 and 3, he just conveniently has a little kid sidekick, Padawan learner. So the fans were not very receptive to Ahsoka at first. And to be completely honest, I was one of them, because not because of the whole like sexism thing. I don't mind female characters in anything, and I don't want to like go back down that road again because it just gives me headaches just talking about it. But my problem with Ahsoka in concept initially was I took one look at that character. I was like, oh no, it's gonna be Scrappy-Doo. Star Wars is getting its own version of Scrappy-Doo. Some might say that Jar Jar was that. I disagree. I think Jar Jar was more like a failed Chewbacca almost. Like, yeah, he's a side character, but he's not he's not there to be like the Robin, like the stand-in for the kids to see themselves, kind of for the kids to put themselves in that role. Which is quite honestly a character type that I'm not a huge fan of, because it's like, who wants to be fucking Robin? I want to be Batman. I was like, screw that shit. And I was looking at like Ahsoka and I thought, oh my god, it's Scrappy-Doo. It's going to be something like that. It's going to be, or, if it's not a kid stand-in character, it's going to be like a deliberately obnoxious comedic character like an Orko or a Snarf or something like that. And I just looked at it and thought, oh no, that is going to be horrible. Anakin Skywalker gets a Robin. No! And I resisted watching the movie and the TV show as a result, because I just assumed I was going to hate it. And I was like, nope, it's not going to work. It's going to be something that's not for me, is basically how I felt at the time. Until I think the first season had ended, and people told me, it's like, Patrick, it's really not that bad. People told me, it's like, the first, not every episode's a winner, but there are some pretty good ones sprinkled in there, and I think you'll like it. And so I gave the show a chance, watched it, and I liked it. I liked the show. And in particular, I liked Ahsoka Tano more than I would have ever imagined. And I think what it was that helped her work so well was, well, first of all, let me get this out of the way. After I watched the first season of Clone Wars, I went back and was like, oh, well, let me check out the movie. Maybe the movie's pretty good. No, the movie was garbage. The Clone Wars movie is completely horrible. So bad, in fact, I would say, worst Star Wars movie ever made. People can say Phantom Menace. People can say Attack of the Clones. People can say the Ewok movies. Clone Wars. It's awful. That movie is awful. Completely terrible. But anyway, Ahsoka Tano in that Clone Wars movie was every bit as bad as I expected. It was like, oh, thank God I didn't start with the movie, because I would have hated her. Fortunately, she got much better throughout the show. In the movie, she called R2-D2 R2-y, which was really, like, cutesy and annoying. That did not stick, thank God. And she was just kind of like the annoying little kid sidekick. But in the show, they had more opportunities to explore her character and explore how she thinks and feels in comparison to Anakin, and how she has a lot of Anakin's like same character falls, but also a little bit more noble. So you don't have that same fear that she's going to fall to the dark side like Anakin did, but she was a fun character to follow, and actually in a weird way she ended up being the heart of the show, because it's like, all right, you look at Obi-Wan, it's like, all right, I know where he ends up, I know where Anakin ends up, I know where Padme and all the other prequel characters end up. I don't know what happens to her. Did she survive Order 66? Did she, I mean, what happened to her? Like, they've got to get to that point, right? And that intrigue about whether Ahsoka would die in Order 66, or if Anakin would kill her himself, or if she would die during the Clone Wars, and that would be a contributing factor to Anakin losing his mind. Whatever. That level of intrigue made her an interesting character, and actually made the show worth watching and continuing to watch, because it was like, oh man, is this the one where Ahsoka's going to bite the dust? She was the one that had legitimate drama attached to her, because I didn't know what was going to happen to her. And I figured at some point they're going to have to kill her at some point, right? And she was a very interesting character for the show. And like I said, she ended up being the heart of the Clone Wars show. So you had this character that I was not a fan of in concept before even watching the show. And then I watched it, and I fell in love with her. And then by the time you get to Rebels, where she makes her grand return, I jumped out of my chair and cheered. So, yeah, Ahsoka definitely proved me wrong and definitely won me over, and became one of the best, like, new Star Wars characters since the original movies. So, yeah, so when this book got released, I was really excited, because it was like, okay, because there's a huge time gap there in between the events of Clone Wars, where she ultimately decides to leave the Jedi Order, which I'm not going to explain, because that'll... we'll be here all day, but she ultimately decides to leave the Jedi Order, which pretty much spared her from Order 66, but what happened to her between then and Rebels? And this book tries to fill that gap, and like I said, the book was written by E.K. Johnston. Like I said, not overly familiar with her work, but I think it was a book that needed to be written, quite honestly, because there is so much material there that you could potentially do with Ahsoka during that time period, that, it was just begging to be done. If not a book, then like a TV movie, or like her own like in-between animated series or something. I want to know what happens. I'd also heard that one of the original plans for Clone Wars before Disney took over was that the original planned finale was going to be Revenge of the Sith told from her point of view, which would have been very interesting, and I would have liked it. And honestly, part of me wanted this book to be that. It wasn't entirely that, but I guess I'll just go into the details of the book right now. Very much like Kenobi, it does have like these interludes that interrupt the main story. What these do, these are flashbacks detailing some of the events taking place during Revenge of the Sith, and what Ahsoka was doing during that time period, and how she ultimately escaped and everything like that. They even show her like fighting with Darth Maul, which was interesting. Little interesting pairing, which we would see in Star Wars Rebels eventually. But I thought those, very much like the meditation periods in Kenobi, I thought these added a lot as well, because it did help fill in some of those blanks that I wanted to have filled in. And personally, though, I would have preferred it if like the flashback segments were like the main story, because that's really what I wanted. But the main story here is that we see Ahsoka in exile, trying to hide from the Empire, very much like every other Jedi in the universe. Because just because she left the Order doesn't mean that some, evil Imperials aren't going to find out who she is, what she is, and try to kill her. So very much like Kenobi, she winds up on this backwater planet, just trying to lead a simple life and just try to survive, basically. And ultimately, she gets wrapped up in this Imperial struggle, and the farmers and all the people living in this town that she ultimately moved to. She winds up having to help them against the Imperials, and that sort of like sparks interest in her to get back and fight the good fight. And she ultimately joins the rebellion and basically winds up in the place that she is in Rebels. And we get those, a lot of the questions that we had asked from her appearances in Rebels, we get answered here. She gets the white lightsabers. That's detailed in the book. Or the white sabers, as I like to call them, which were very cool. I remember when she debuted them in Rebels, and I was like, man, that's different. Wasn't expecting that. And we find out how she got them here, which was neat. We get to see her do battle with one of the Sith Inquisitors, the fifth brother, I believe. I don't know. They're always like the seventh sister or the second son or whatever. They all, like, all the Inquisitors seem to have those names, and I just lose track of them. But she does do battle with an Inquisitor here in this story, and he's kind of like the main villain as Ahsoka tries to protect these people from the Empire's wrath. And overall, it's a fun story. And what I will say about this book is that if you like Ahsoka, you will like this book, and it's probably a must-read. If you don't like Ahsoka, you're not going to like this book and stay far away from it, because this book's not going to change your mind. But if you're like me and you're a fan of Ahsoka, it is very enjoyable, and every moment that she has throughout the book, and every time she speaks or acts, it pretty much captures the spirit of the character that I knew in Clone Wars and Rebels. So, I felt like this was, she is the type that's, she knows that she's supposed to be in exile and stay quiet and keep her head down, but at the same time, she's always had that little bit of spunk to her, and, all it takes is one slight push, and she's going to be out there fighting and trying to seek justice for everybody and doing all that stuff and be the hero. And ultimately, I think the book works in that regard. I think if you're craving an Ahsoka story, this book is definitely worthy of picking up. I think it's well written as far as capturing the essence of the character. However, where it kind of falls for me, and this is where Kenobi definitely succeeded, the side characters and the people that Ahsoka makes friends with on this planet that she ultimately winds up having to protect, they're not as good as the side characters in Kenobi. Like I said, I talked about Annalene. She's great, and I could probably listen to her getting her own story, quite honestly. I liked her that much. Here, the farmers and all the other side characters in Ahsoka, they're just kind of stock villagers that need to be protected by the hero, and that's about it. There's not really a whole lot of intrigue to them. They don't really stand on their own as characters. They're just... not that they're bad, they're not, like, annoying or anything, but they're just kind of cogs in the machine of the plot, while Ahsoka is really the only character that really stands out and really shines. And granted, it's her story, and it's her book, and she's supposed to be the one that shines, but I felt like Kenobi gave me a lot more intrigue, because Kenobi is still great, but we have all these other side characters interacting in the story, and it makes everything from the drama and the climax and all of that a lot more interesting than, say, here, where it's just Ahsoka being Ahsoka, and it's really good for that. And it's a little bit more action-packed than Kenobi, but it doesn't have the... Again, what Ahsoka was protecting and was trying to save wasn't as interesting as what Kenobi was trying to save. So that makes Kenobi's story a little bit more interesting and a lot more enjoyable for me. But as far as like the Disney canon is concerned, I think Ahsoka is one of the better books that I've read in the Disney canon. I wouldn't put it up there as one of my all-time favorite Star Wars books, but the new Disney canon has kind of struggled with some new material. Thrawn was very good. C-3PO, the Phantom Limb, very good. Actually, that reminds me, I need to read like the Darth Vader comics and the Princess Leia comics and all that. But I think Ahsoka is one of the better books in the new canon. And I'm glad I read it, and I'm glad I own it. I think it's a really good one. But again, the point of this video is to compare EU to the new U. And I got to give the point to the expanded universe here. I think Kenobi was... a superior book, and again, I think it was more because of the details, and those details being the side characters and that you ultimately like and care for, and then when Obi-Wan has to save them or protect them, it gives the story more weight, and that's something that I felt like was kind of missing in Ahsoka. But still, if you're looking for a good book in the new canon to read, I mean, Ahsoka is one of the better ones to go with, without question. And if you're a diehard Expanded Universe fan, I think Kenobi is absolutely required reading. I think it's great, and it's one of my favorite books with the Star Wars label on it. So, Yeah, I think we're done here. Yeah, that was a fun one. I enjoyed that. And again, it's two enjoyable books and trying to pick a favorite out of the two, so it ended up being fine for me. But yeah, I might do some more reviews like this if I do find that there's an expanded universe novel and a Disney novel that can be compared and reviewed together alongside each other in the same way. But it was definitely fun, and like I said, both books get a thumbs up from me and are definitely recommended. Especially if you like those characters. If you're a Kenobi fan, you absolutely have to read Kenobi. If you're an Ahsoka fan, you probably should read Ahsoka, because I think it gives you pretty much what you want. But yeah, two enjoyable books, and yeah, that concludes this review here. I'll be back next month with another book review from Star Wars, but until